today we're going to try again to make another tape. This is December 18th, 1996. It's about 11 o'clock in the morning, and we had a good snowfall last night, about 8 inches. Must be about 10 or 12 inches on the ground on the level at the present time. Now, it wasn't a storm, it snowed like no tomorrow. Just heavy snow for probably 7 or 8 hours, and this morning, of course, everybody's out shoveling, and the machines are going to clear the snow. The plows came by on the street, and probably got about 3 or 4 foot banks already on the side of the road. Now today, I want to take a little different tack on making the tape. I am in possession of my dad's, G.W. Grambua's, diary for the years 1914. Now this is just a little black book called a diary. George W. Grambua's got his name on it. And on the outside cover, it says George W. Grambua, Rogers, Michigan. Now, you notice it says Rogers, Michigan. Yes, it was originally Rogers, Michigan, the village of Rogers. And in the early days, the post office was Rogers, Michigan. You look at the letters in the early days, and it's Rogers, Michigan. You look at the correspondence, the records of the courthouse, everything, the city. It was the village of Rogers. And just recently, I had the city people down here look up as to when we changed from the village of Rogers to the city of Rogers City. Well, they finally found it. It was in March of 1924 that the people in the village of Rogers voted by actual vote to change the name of the village of Rogers to the city of Rogers City. So there you have it. Now, if you graduated from Rogers High School previous to the year 1924, then your diploma said that you were a graduate of Rogers High School. Now, mine happens to be Rogers City, and Herman's did too. But before that, before 1924, you were a graduate of Rogers High School. Well, anyway, in this little black book, it's an interesting little thing. It has in here the calendars for the year 1914 and 15. And there are a few other little things here I noticed in the fourth part of this book. And I'll just see if I can find the right spot here. And it says here the rates of postage. First class letter, 2 cents per ounce. Postal cards, 1 cent. Now, local letters, you didn't have to pay 2 cents. You could put a 1 cent stamp on if you just send a local letter here within the village. Then you could. It also says here that the parcel post rate per pound. The first pound was 5 cents, and then after you got higher than that, then the next 5 pounds was 3 cents. So for 300 miles from the city of Detroit, it would cost you probably about 35 cents to send a package. A package that had, let's see, per pound, 5 cents. Yeah, that'd be about right. You could send a letter to England for 2 cents. Germany cost you 5 cents, and so on down the line. Now, in the 1910, it says here, the population of the nation was 93 million. This was 1910. And let's just take a look at a few other little things here that he mentions here about some of these towns. What does it say? Chicago, 2,185,000. New York, 4,776,000. Well, let's see. Bay City had 45,000. And let's see if we can find another one here. Grand Rapids had 112,000. and so on down the line. And well, let's take a few other ones here that we can find them. Here's St. Louis, Missouri, at 687,000. And here's New Orleans, 340,000. And Pasadena, California, 30,000. Grand Rapids, 112, and so on down the line. Now, I was going to say that Mother gave me this little black book one day about a year before she died. She had it in her big, a big pocketbook. What do you call that? Like ladies use. And it's probably the last possession that she had up there. And she said, I want to give this to you. I had seen it some years before that because Mother had shown it to me, but it's probably one of the last possessions that she had. And do you recall she died on July 16th, in 91 at age 102. She said, I want you to have this, and so she gave it to me at that time. It's very, very interesting. Dad wrote very small letters. I don't know how he did that because his hand usually was quite big. But it starts out, and he entered it on a daily basis from July 1st, 1914 to May 14th, 1960. Why? Mother said, I don't know why he started. I don't know why he stopped. But nevertheless, it stopped a few days after the funeral of great-great-grandmother Paetke in Metz. And as I told you before, that was one of the first funerals that I had ever attended. These are just daily notes. Just a little jot here, a lot there. Now, a lot of the people that are mentioned in those years of 14, 15, and 16, I knew. Now, my memory goes back pretty much to probably about age 3. Starting from about age 3, I remember an awful lot of people. I remember an awful lot of things that happened. Now, I don't remember everything. I don't remember all the people that I saw, but those people that were associated with Mother and Dad who came to the house, came for dinner, or went to other people's house for dinner, people that I saw on a very frequent basis, whether they were in Rogers City or out to Grandma and Grandpa's. I got so that I knew all the people out there in that Metz area who frequented the Grambua house. Now, you got to remember, Grandpa Dramberg was a county official. He was one of the superintendents of the poor. And so there were also always people, not always, but a lot of time there would be people coming to the house who wanted to talk over situations about some people who had bad luck, needed help. It was the forerunner of the welfare department. That's what it was. It was one of the early welfare systems that the counties had. But if I was there and people came, like they came to the house, they came for lunch, they came for dinner, or we went over places, a lot of those people I remember very, very well. And now, that doesn't mean that I remember everybody. No. But a lot of people I certainly do. And but the friends and neighbors that were around Rogers City, I have a pretty good recollection of who those people were. That I might say one thing here that maybe I mentioned before. I didn't know that there was anything unusual about that ability to recall until Mother explained it to me one time, and I remember when it happened. She was sitting around the dining room table. I think I had just come back from Minneapolis, where I had been in the Shriners Hospital up there, and she had all her photographs scattered around on that dining room table. And you remember she had an awful lot of them. And she had one pile over here, and she said, well, these are going to have to look at again. She said, there are some people on here. She said, I don't know who that is. And she just went along there, and so I was taking a look at the pile. She said she didn't know who they were. And I picked out a couple, and I said, well, Mother, I said, this is so-and-so, and this is so-and-so. And she looked at me, and she looked at it again. She said, well, she did. She said, how'd you know that? Well, I said, I remember those people being here. And then went through others, and I picked out a few things here and there. Some people I didn't know who they were either. But there were, I don't know, maybe there was a dozen or 2 dozen places where I said to these people, well, these people used to come over here to play cards. They ate here, or they were in the church, or whatever it happened to be, where I would recognize certain key things. And then she told me, well, she said, I tell you, young man, you have a gift. She said, I didn't know who those people were. Or if I did, she said, I lost track of them, but she said, no, she said, I can see. And then she started questioning me. And I told her, well, I said, I didn't think there was anything unusual about that. I said, I remember most of the things that happened to me from probably the age 3 or 4 on. Remember most of the kids that were in my kindergarten class when I went to kindergarten, the teachers that I had, the period of time that I was in St. Louis, Missouri, the people that I met, people in Detroit, the Zimmermans, and the people in Toledo, the Crefts and the Perlicks and the Lukes, and the various people that I met, encountered there at that time. And then she told me, she said, well, she said, you're gifted. She said, believe me. She said, I got a pretty good memory, but she said, that's something unusual. And after that, a few occasions, when I'd go up to see her, she asked me about who certain people were that did this, or had this store or that store in Roger City. And not on every time, but many times I could tell her who had the store, what the name of the people was. I couldn't probably remember the name, but I hadn't seen the people in years. And so it was down the line. Well, anyway, to get back to that. These people were mentioned in this diary, and so I'm going to start right in from the day of then again I say on January 1, 1914. And it says here, out home. It means apparently that they went to Metz. Visited with Henry. That would be Uncle Henry, Dad's brother. It says the roads were fair. We went by buggy. Well, most roads must have been darn fair because this was January 1st, and if they could go by buggy, ordinarily in the wintertime they would have to go by sleigh. But they went by buggy. Well, if they went by buggy, they probably just went down to the livery stable and rented a horse and buggy, and away they went. That's what you did in those days, because in 1914, Dad didn't have a car. He didn't have a car until after World War I was over with, until about 1919 that he had his first car. Now, it says here that on this Friday, the 2nd of January, 1914, snow this morning. And then that's all there is. Now, on Saturday, the 8th, it says rain and snow. Sunday, the 4th of January, it says no sleighing. Detloff over. Now that would be Charlie Detloff. Charlie Detloff was a good friend of around their car, because ordinarily in the wintertime people didn't use their cars. It must have been pretty bare winter that you could take a car out, because I know that after Dad got our car there for a period of years, and because they didn't plow the roads, when it came about December 1st, the car was put up on jacks to take the pressure off of the inner tubes. The battery was taken out and the car just stood in the garage. You waited for the end of March or 1st of April. It says also on Monday, the 5th of January 1914, went to a school meeting. Old Dad was on the Board of Education. They had just built that building which you and I attended to, the 3-room brick, before they built the new high school over there in 1928. This was 1914. They just built another building. Then on Tuesday, he said he went to choir practice. That would be after he was part of the choir at the Lutheran Church. And then also they had an invitation to go to Coonert's. Now, the Coonert house was a house that you recall as the McDonald house. A fellow by the name of Ernest Coonert, who was a carpenter, and he helped build part of Dad and Mother's house, invited them over. Now, people did that very frequently in those days. You went to your neighbors for dinner. You went to lunch for supper. That was very common, especially on the weekends or even sometimes during the day. If they had special food, they did. Here on Wednesday, there was a Lutheran conference at the church. Now, on Thursday, the 8th, it said there was a school meeting, no quorum, so no meeting. Horses in Canada were stolen, and a heifer was shot. Now, Ed Schultz, here of the Schultz family, and he had married Gus Littke's sister. And they were the Schultz boys, Julius and Ed, and Aunt Emma Grambua, and they're the people that migrated to Calgary area of Canada, homesteaded out there in 1903. And in the early years, when they came to visit back home, they came in the wintertime because of the summertime. Of course, they were busy on the farms. So apparently in 1914, it said Ed Schultz and the family came. And they reported that some of their horses were stolen and a heifer was shot. The rustlers were working out there. This was wild country out there near Alberta. They rode on open prairies. Those fellows each homesteaded about a square mile of land, planted it all to wheat. And it was also on that day, it was snowing. And then it says in the evening they went to Ed Wenzel's. Now, Ed Wenzel married a Helen Schultz. That would be, Helen was the mother of Penny Wenzel. You remember Penny? Well, his mother was one of the Schultzes and related to Dad. And then it also says here that, now that was the house which we would call the Pedal Cow house. That's where I was born. Mrs. Pedal Cow was an aunt to Helen Schultz, who married Ed Wenzel, Penny's mother. And it says here that Clarence DeVincent was out with his automobile. This was on Friday. Wow. There was a school meeting, and they said that the sleighing was good. Now, it says here that Mrs. Ed Schultz, that's coming from Canada, and the children from Alberta visited us. Well, if they visited us at that time with children, the children slept upstairs in that great big barn before it was divided up there in the top, upstairs. There was only one bedroom up there before that. And they just put up a rope with a curtain on it. The boys slept on one side, the girls slept on the other side. And it says here, Monday there was a heavy snowstorm. Now this is interesting. Also on the 12th, it says Alfred Dulac married Helen Montic. Now Alfred Dulac, I remember Alfred Dulac and his wife, and they lived just up top of the Ranky Hill over there, close to what we'd call the Radio Tavern, as you know, in that area. They had 3 boys. One of the boys still lives around here now. But there were at least 3 Dulacs. You remember there was Alfred, and there was Albert Dulac, and the other one. The Dulac, you remember the Dulac family that lived just on the end of the street there. Now, it says here also, on the 14th, they received word that to the Ed Collibaums, their boy was born. Now, the Collibaums lived in Carleton, Michigan. And Mrs. Collibaum was a Zimmerman, And her mother was Marie or Mary, who was a sister to Grandpa Grambua up here in Winterton. Now the Cobham family still lives in Carleton. They were millers down there. They had a grist mill. And but they were related, and I remember being there along with Grandpa Grambua one time when we took a trip down there. And now it says here on the Tuesday was 0 weather, 2 below. Herman had a sore hand. Wednesday, a cold wind. Thursday, warmer. Alma had a sore throat. Harry and Herman have sore hands. Friday the 16th, it says snowing softly, very mild. Saturday was choir practice. I imagine that's probably the church again, because Dad was in the choir at the church. I remember that. Now it says here, Clees over for dinner on Sunday the 18th. Now the Clees were a well-known family here in Rogers City years ago, and Henry Clee, who was a good friend of Dad's, they were fellow school teachers out here in the country area years and years ago, about the turn of the century, about 1900. And they came from the Belknap and Hawks area. And he later on was postmaster, Henry Clee, and he had he had about 2 girls and 5 boys. And some of those boys were in high school when I was a boy. I was there, and also the girl. There was an older girl, Ethel. She was a couple years ahead of me, about a year ahead of Herman. But that family stayed here until about 1928, and then they picked up and went to Detroit and went down there, and that's where the family grew up down there. But in the early days, Clee liked to fish, Dad liked to fish, and Clee liked to hunt, Dad liked to hunt, and Dad fished and hunted every chance that he could get. Now, Dad was at the bank, and it says here that Wheelock and Wheelock were the examiners, bank examiners. Well, the state would come in to examine the banks periodically. Now it says here Hardise down. Now, I don't know who Hardise was, because there are a good number of Hardises out there. You picked up their Christmas tree. The Christmas tree was picked and they threw it out. It says here, Dr. Arscott dressed Harry's chin. Well, I thought he must have cut the chin. There was a snowstorm on Tuesday the 20th of January, and Alma cooked soup. And then Bertram was over for the evening. That next door, Bertram. The Bertram and the Grambua family were always very, very close. During this time here, you'll see where they frequently ate at each other's house. Mother would have something special, she'd invite them over for dinner. They'd have something special over there, invite them over for dinner. And that was true with some of the other people in the immediate area too. Now, here, Wednesday, it says Osgood to Alpena. Sausage came from home by parcel post. Evidently they made some sausage out in Metz and they put it on the train would bring it into Rogers City. Osgood to Alpena. Now, C.H. Osgood was the head of the bank. He and his wife Ella were the people that hired Dad back in 1907 when after Dad completed some training at Big Rapids at Ferris Institute. But they lived in that house, what you call the manse now, next to the Presbyterian Church. They were the family that donated the area called the Pines, on which the Presbyterian Church was built. They owned those lots there. And then shortly after the Presbyterian Church was built, 1924, they retired from the bank here, went to Alpena, and they sold that home to the Presbyterian Church for just a few dollars. They were instrumental in getting it started. And C.H. Osgood apparently was quite a prosperous man. She was a great friend of mine, Mrs. Ella, a great friend of mine. During the year that I was in St. Louis, she wrote me every week. I still have some of the letters that she wrote me. She'd cut things out of the Detroit paper, especially the Piggly Wiggly stories and Peter Rabbit, and then send them to me. And of course, some of it I could read, others I'd have to have Grandpa Gramberg read for me. But I still have one of the letters that she wrote me back in 1919 when I was in St. Louis, Missouri. And this is interesting. Up there where you put your return address on a letter, up there in the left-hand corner, all that it said up there, it says The Pines, Rogers City, Michigan. Or Rogers, Michigan. That was, you see, that was in 1919. Rogers, Michigan, The Pines. Her home had a name. There was a little plaque that extended under the overlap of the porch there, probably about 5 inches by 12 or 13 inches, and on there was printed, people named their homes in those days. Isn't that interesting? But she was very, very, and I was in her home many times, and in the later, after that, she'd stop and ask me to come in, give me some cookies, and I was in that home many, many times. And she was a very, very gracious lady. This is interesting. At the back of that house, just like in the back of our house, there they had a barn. There was a little horse barn on the back of that house. Later became a garage. And but after I don't know whether I don't recall that he ever had a horse in there, but what he did, he converted that little barn into an ice house. Now, people did that too. They had ice brought in, places were filled with sawdust, and so that they could cool what they had to cool to make ice cream or anything else. They had ice, and the ice was also used in a box for their ice box. They had an ice box cooler there. Now, also, I might say, right alongside of that little cabin there, or that little structure, which was originally a barn, there were some bushes growing there. I don't know how many, and they were hazelnut trees, hazelnut bushes. And she fenced those things off so that the kids wouldn't pick her hazelnut. And there were hazelnuts in various parts of town. There were lots of them on top of the hill there, in the area around Gilpin Field. We used to go up there and pick hazelnuts. Beautiful. I mean, that's what do you call that today? Well, I'll think of it. Hazelnuts. All right, now Osgood went to Alpena. Now, what would happen there was that Dad worked for Osgood. Osgood would be gone frequently, the both of them. They would go to Detroit, or they'd go to Chicago, or they'd go to check up on their bank land in the Dakotas. And they would leave the care of the house up to Dad. So Dad, especially in the wintertime, would go over and make sure that the furnace was kept up so that things wouldn't freeze. And he just kind of worked. And Dad said he paid him, or whatever was that his dad said it was a good job. He said, and then it happened frequently that in the notes you'll see where Osgood is gone. Well, then here it says Albert Selke was down. Now that would be from the area of Hawks. And the Cordes girls were over. Now the Cordes girls were friends. They came from the Royston area. One of the Cordes girls, Marie, married Oswald Bruder, and one of the other Cordes girls married Art Grambua some years later. Now, it says here they were over. Now it says here the Skiba girl came over to Wash. Now, in those early days, of course, I don't remember the Skiba girl, but girls quite frequently were hired to come in and help, house clean, washing, and things of that type. And especially if there were young children around, they came to be babysitters. And this girl here I don't remember, but I do remember Emma Raesky, was one of the first ones that I remember. And I remember Elsie Arlt, who married Jack Kleiber. And then there was Hannah Tischler, and there was a whole raft of girls who came in from the farm, stayed the weekend, Bertha Zinke was one. But nevertheless, the Skiba girl, and I explained that. Just beyond Bertram's. Bertram had a great big lot there, you know. The Bertram lot was about 500 feet across the front. Remember, the Bertram Creek ran through there. Well, the house that you remember as the Schlager house, or the Bruder house, was built originally by a fellow named Skiba. And he had a family there. And then later on, that family sold the house to the Schlagers. And of course, Molly Schlager married Bruder, and that's the Bruder family that you know. Well, anyway, the Skiba girl was over helping out. I remember Mother talking about that. Then it says here on the 14th that Clee became postmaster. Then here it says that the Helmuth Erkwitz funeral. I don't know who Helmuth Erkwitz was. And it says Mrs. Charlie Hopp Jr. died. Bertram was over. That'd be Bert Bertram. And we took 2 flashlight pictures. I wonder what those pictures were they took by flashlight. Flash something. Then on the 26th, it says there was a school meeting. It says Grossman and Clee came over in the evening. Now, Grossman was a friend of Dad's. He'd been one of the early people out of the Belknap and Hawks area, and he became a dentist and came back here to practice. Well, it says Grossman and Clee, those guys knew each other as kids, came over for the evening. Now, what does it say here? Wait a minute. I can't make out. But on the Tuesday, the 27th of January, there was a bank meeting, and there were 7 directors elected: John Heft, Al Lendorf, some of them named Glosser, A.P. Bertram, Charlie Voglein, a fellow by the name of Malloy, and Rudolph Delgin. Okay. Now, here it says the 28th, Osgood to Ionia. Raining. Now, raining. Friday, worked at Osgood's. Choir practice. And then it says Saturday the 31st, Osgood back from Ionia, an awful snowstorm. The bank not open Saturday evening. They used to work all day Saturday, and they used to open on Saturday evenings also. But it says there was an awful snowstorm, so they didn't bar. Now it says the Frederick Mill was started. They built what you call the Frederick Lumber Company. They built that building in 1914. Now, on Sunday, February 1st, 1914, stormy, very, very stormy. On Monday, Osgood went to Onaway. Harry had a sore neck. Dark all day. Tuesday, sun shining today, mild. Grandpa Dramberg down, meaning that he came for one reason or other, maybe probably walked. You have to remember that Grandpa Dramberg quite often, in the early days, when they had meetings here in town at the courthouse that he had to attend, he'd walk down. He'd put the county books on his shoulder on a gunny sack and walk. He could have taken a horse and buggy, but he preferred to walk. He liked to see what was happening along the way. Now, it says here that took Harry to Dr. Osgood. He had bumps. Worked for Osgood 1.5 hours. 1.5 hours. Thursday the 5th, a snowstorm. A letter, I don't know, I can't read that, who that was. On Friday the 6th, there was a fire at Clark's store. Now, Clark's store, you remember it probably, remember where Paul Hardee's had his electric shop. That was Clark's grocery store in there at that time, right next to the McWilliams mortuary at that time. Now, Saturday, storm open in the evening at the bank. Storm open in the evening at the bank. they didn't close. On Sunday, Coonert was over in the evening. That'd be that same Coonert that lived over there in the McDonald house. On the 9th, a Miss Maharg inquired about a position. I think she was a girl from Alpena. Worked for Osgood in the evening, 2 hours. Worked for Osgood on the 10th. It's 10 below zero. Ma and Pa, Pa and Ma down. Now, I don't know who that means, whether that's Pa and Ma, that would probably have been Herman and Amelia. Olson came from Minot. Olson was a banker in Minot. And the bank had a lot of loans out to the farm area in the North Dakota district. And apparently they were always very good. Mother and Dad, you remember, took various trips out there to see those people. Dad said it was a good investment. Today is Uncle Carl's birthday, the 11th of February. Worked for Osgood an hour and a half. Lincoln's birthday, the 12th, 18 below zero. Worked at the abstract office. Osgood went to Alpena. 18 below again. Wow. Hazel Corner came to work at the bank. She was a girl out of Alpena. And in the evening there was choir practice. Bank opened in the evening on Saturday. Electors meeting. February 14th, 1914. Alma and Herman to church. Went to the landing. Now the landing is a term, that was the area up there, if you remember, around Polk's Mill, where Kaiser Busky had a mill later on. That was the area of the landing, was the place where when the train came in, the engine and the coal car had to go up another half mile and turn around. There was a big landing up there. And in later years, that's where a lot of the logs came in that were brought into the Polk's Mill. And that's over there near the Trout River area. Now it says there Mrs. Fleming and her daughters came over. That would have been Cora and Esther. And Mr. and Mrs. Coonert came. Well, those people visited a lot. And now on Monday, on the 16th, they had, it was called Institute Week. What happened there was that the teachers in the rural schools in the county would gather either in Rogers or Onaway or Millersburg or wherever it happened to be for instruction. You remember what they call the old Teachers Institute. And then later on we had bigger institutes. We used to have them at Sheboygan or Petoskey or Traverse, the Teachers Institute. Well, that's what this was. And I don't know just where that was held, but in other words, this was Institute Week. And now, here, this is interesting. This is in our home here in Rogers City. The telephone was installed. This was 1914, Wednesday the 18th, 1914. They installed the telephone game. And on that day also, there was a basketball game. Rogers versus Alpena, and it says we won. So I imagine the Rogers City beat. Now, where in the world did they play basketball at that time? They played it in a building called the Rink. Now, the Rink was a large structure that was put up by some enterprises here in town, but one of the leaders was a fellow by the name of O'Neill. And that's where the bowling alley is at the present time. That was a large area. It was built as a skating rink, roller skating rink. They used it for dances, they used it for basketball, they used it for political meetings, they used it for lyceums. Anything that you can think of was a large place where the town could gather for meetings. And it was called a rink, skating rink. But the real name for it was the Rogers Athletic Club, or the RAC Hall, they called them, the RAC Hall. But that's where they played basketball until such time that they built the new gym in 1927-28. And also, here, there was a lecture, and I suppose it probably was at the rink, or it could have been at the assembly hall of the high school upstairs, and by a Professor Pierce. And then on Friday it says Alma went to Metz, end of the Institute. Saturday I went by train to Metz. Party in the evening at Schultz's. Okay. Sunday, went to Dramberg's. Well, I must have been staying over at Grambua's. I went to Dramberg's. And then the forenoon went to Metz. I went to see Henry. And then came back to Rogers by train. The water pipes froze. Had dinner at Bertram's. There was a school meeting, and it was 16 degrees below zero. Then on the 25th of February 1914, it says Oscar went to Alpena again. The weather was mild. And Thursday was thawing. Then it says Herman and I went to Ed Wenzel's to see Ed Schultz. Now, Ed Schultz was one of the boys from Canada. He was one of them that went up there. See, this is in the wintertime again. That's when those people would come. And it says, stormy, March 1st, stormy. Choir practice. Over to Kunitz. Monday, stormy. Went to Cleese in the evening. Tuesday, Grossman, that's a dentist, went over for dinner. The 4th, Alma went to the dentist. Dinner with Detlofs. Ed Schultz and family left for Alberta, Canada. Went back. Friday, Bertram was over in the evening at A.P. Bertram next door. Saturday, a snowstorm. On Sunday, Alma went to church, choir practice, and I went to choir practice in the evening. On Monday, there was a village election. Paid Rogers City Electric Light and Power Company $10. It doesn't say what for, but we have separate Detlofs. Dramberg's Pa and Ma came down. Also Mrs. Hardy's and Mrs. Kowaleski. Oh, this is interesting. On Wednesday, the 11th, there was an eclipse of the moon. And Alma went to the dentist on Thursday, the 12th. There was a special train on the D&M. There was a basketball game in Alpena. Now, that happened in the early days. They would run specials. Came back from Alpena, 3 o'clock in the morning. It doesn't say whether we won or lost. But they would. Sometime Rogers, I remember even when I was superintendent, they had a special train that went to Alpena with a gang of kids in a basketball season. They would do that. If you can guarantee them a full house, they would send a special cabs up here, or special coaches up here. Let's see here. This is the Sunday the 14th, Theodore Nuffsey funeral in Belknap. Monday the 16th, 14 March, rained last night. Alma had a birthday party. Yay! Steffens were over in the evening. Now, Steffen would have been Carl Steffen. The building which is now the Zagorski Plumbing Heating Shop, that was the Steffen place, Steffens. And he was originally came over here from Germany. Steffen's sister was married to William Hardy's. And they had a little haberdashery store there. He was a shoe repairman. And then they ran a little haberdashery store there. Now, Tuesday, 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day. I took my watch to Mindy. Mindy must have been a repairman. Wednesday the 18th is snowstorm. Alma to the dentist. Thursday, 2 below zero. Letter from Otto. I went to Bertram's. Friday, choir practice. Bertram was over. Bright Sunday morning on Saturday the 21st. Grossman and Clee came over. People always got together a lot for socializing. And of course, they say they love to hunt and fish, those guys.